Hi, this is Dr. Joe Lauritsen, and we're listening to Rebellion Dogs Radio.
Welcome to Rebellion Dogs Radio, a 21st century look at addiction and recovery.
Now, less dogma and more bite. This is episode 46.
From Houston, Texas, October 2018, NAADAC, National Association of Addiction Professionals, was meeting for their annual conference. Rebellion Dogs Publishing was presenting No God, No Problem, accommodating the growing appetite for secular 12-step facilitation. This is a repeat of that presentation. Under the continuing education category of cultural humility, other-oriented care is based on clients' personality, culture, demographics, concerns, age, race, gender, sexual identification, sexual orientation, their creed. It's about individualized care. We had people from corrections, the treatment industry, from Iceland to California. Academia was in the house. The 2019 NAADAC conference will be in Orlando, Florida. Can't be there this year. I'm doing the Recovery Capital Conference in Canada. Meet Joe Nowinski. He's a previous guest on Rebellion Dogs Radio. He's gone head-to-head with Lance Dotis on The Fix. He's writing a new book to help clients transitioning from treatment to the real world. It'll be evidence-based. 12-step facilitation evolved from the Minnesota model. That is combining 12 steps with clinical care. Go to meetings, get a sponsor, do the steps 1 to 5. It started out on a hunch, was studied. Evidence supports this. It's not perfect, but certainly defendable. He wrote a book for everyday people. If you work it, it works. The science behind 12-step recovery. If you've never read this book, it looks at some of the studies that have done. People say, you can't prove if AA works, it's unscientific. Well, that may be old news, and he looks at some of the more recent and landmark studies. Before this book, he wrote the first edition of 12-Step Facilitation, a handbook. It's a therapeutic approach to treatment and recovery. It's recently been updated, I'm glad to see. Let's look at support for 12-step facilitation. From Alcoholism Treatment Quarterly. It's a cost-effective and useful approach to treating alcohol and other drug-related problems. From Spirituality and Recovery 2011. Atheists and agnostics are less likely to seek recovery assistance through AA, but those who do appear to benefit equally compared to more religious or spiritual individual. That is Kelly et al. From the Harvard School of Addiction and Treatment. Canadian Centre of Substance Abuse, a 2016 survey called Life in Recovery. 70.7% of respondents named 12-step mutual aid support groups as very important to their recovery. In 2018, the Journal of Substance Abuse Treatment took a longitudinal study comparing AA to the newer peer-to-peer mutual aid society. So they compared SMART, LifeRing, Women for Sobriety. The results are in. Every one of them is just as effective as the 12-step model. Nobody's invented a better way. As soon as someone finds the way that gets everybody sober, keeps everybody happy, we'll all do that. But that hasn't happened yet. From page 89 of the 12-step facilitation, discussing higher powers, 12-step fellowships are sometimes mistaken for being religious organizations that pressure their members to pledge belief in a Judeo-Christian God. This isn't true. Religions are governed by a written dogma that is administered by designated clergy and supervised by clerical hierarchy. 12-step fellowships have none of these things. That is true. it's not how a lot of Ninth Circuit courts see it. Mandatory 12-step meeting attendance as a First Establishment Clause violation. There's a case before the courts right now involving an Ohio lawyer, and we'll also talk about a California case, Barry Hazel. In Canada, we have talked about the Toronto or Ontario human rights case with Larry Kay versus GTAI, that is Greater Toronto Area Intergroup, and AA World Services. That matter involved actually AA Intergroup delisting a couple of groups for being secular, and it was found to be not in compliance with the law and the Human Rights Code, and it was corrected in mediation. In Vancouver, in the British Columbia Human Rights Course, there's still a case right now going on involving an atheist BC nurse who was sent to treatment program and told to adhere to AA principles, and he felt that his human rights were violated. We'll talk about that. Let's look at United States District Court for the Northern District of Ohio Eastern Division. With James Linden as the plaintiff, there are several defendants: a treatment center, a probation department, and even at one point his governing body as a lawyer was named. I interviewed James Linden before presenting at NAADAC. You can also Google courthousenews.com and James Linden, and there's more from an interview he gave to the press there. Linden's an atheist. He was convicted of drug charges, which I seem to understand are under appeal. Linden claims in court that a state judge and treatment provider forced him to participate in AA, which he calls monotheistic spirituality. There's a lawsuit now filed in Cleveland against the federal judge that sentenced him and the probation office. What Linden says is compelling any person to attend de facto religious services as a part of mandatory substance abuse treatment programs is a predictable and systemic violation of constitutional law. See, James Linden was told that failure to attend and participate in the 12-step program would result in consequences. He asked for accommodation. He wanted a secular alternative. Here's what James Linden says. Substance abuse counseling can be successfully provided without resorting to religious superstition, appeals to the supernatural, and interference in his sincerely held beliefs concerning religion, Christianity, humanism, and atheism. So Linden opposes the religious approach of the AA program, and his opposition led to dismissal from a counseling and recovery monitoring program known as the Ohio Lawyers Assistance Program. Here's just part of what he's asking for. He wants the court to order that treatment programs that do not offer secular alternatives to AA violate the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. That the defendants in his case have to offer secular alternatives to Alcoholics Anonymous, and to award the plaintiff such other and further relief as the court deems just. Well, what might they deem just? Here's a case from 2014. Included a rank-and-file drug addict who committed a crime, Barry Hazel. He was told he had to go to a 12-step based treatment program and attend AA as a condition of probation. And if he didn't, he would go to jail. So he didn't. He went to jail. And I challenged their position. He won. The state of California, being the parole office, had to pay $1 million, and West Care, the treatment center, had to pay $925,000. I don't know how they get these amounts. Maybe they each have $1 million worth of coverage, so they no one wanted them to dig out of their own pockets. But this is going to be a problem for insurance companies. Someone's paying, right? I'm a drug addict. When I was new in recovery, I don't think the best thing to do for me when I was angry would have been to give me $2 million. But I'm not saying he didn't deserve it. Just saying it could have been avoided. So let me take you to British Columbia Human Rights Tribunal file number 14339, Wood versus Vancouver Coastal Health Authority and others. This is a 2016 British Columbia Human Rights Tribunal case. He was actually sent to Homewood in Guelph. Woods neither believes in God nor in submitting himself to a higher power. He takes exception to being placed in such a program and to having his professional certification reinstated, being dependent on continuing in AA. Here's what he said: "My other concern is that there are a large number of other addiction treatments available that are secular, and research shows that they work. AA attempts to indoctrinate you with religion and use bullying tactics." Dr. Harry Videlago, he's an addiction physician at Homewood Health Center in Guelph, Ontario, which is a 12-step facilitation-based treatment plan. He wouldn't comment on the patient's stay, but he defended AA as a successful treatment program. There is a treatment called 12-step facilitation, and it's been shown to be a valid treatment modality. That's great. That's not what's being argued in court. Many places use that in combination with cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational interviewing. That's what we do here. So the doctor says the chances of maintaining sobriety are greatly enhanced if people are involved in self-help groups. But he again makes his claim that AA and the 12-step program are not religious organizations, that the term God is used in AA, but it can mean any number of things, including good orderly direction, go on dreaming. The doctor added, go on dreaming? James Christopher, he was a fed-up atheist who founded secular organizations for sobriety in the 1980s. And in an interview with me, he called AA a religion in denial. Dr. Videlago can go on dreaming that his view of mandatory AA attendance will be shared by the BC Human Rights Tribunal. But the evidence doesn't seem to support that. While the Toronto, Ontario human rights case with Larry K. was settled and not adjudicated, the code, the Human Rights Code, clearly states that any organization such as AA that does not accommodate a request for changing the normal way of doing things based on a sincerely held worldview, referred to as creed, one of the rights defended by the Human Rights Code, which is, again, the law, is a violation. This unwillingness to accommodate violates the code and the law. A duty to accommodate, that's the standard. When someone asks for accommodation, it has to be granted if it's reasonable. And while I was in NAADAC, I was reviewing their current day code of conduct, which really takes all these sorts of things into account. Telling someone who objects to religious language that God can have either a secular or a spiritual meaning may constitute something we know now as a form of discrimination called microaggression. They've been likened to carbon monoxide. They're invisible but potentially lethal. And a poisonous environment where you're constantly exposed to these things can be harmful. Wikipedia defines microaggression as verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intended or unintended, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative prejudicial slights that are insults towards any group, particularly culturally marginalized groups. The term was coined by psychiatrist and Harvard University professor Chester Pierce in 1970. His work was then informed by the treatment of African Americans in the U.S. at the time. So biases, we all have them. The best we can do is understand them and try to contain them. From the Mayo Research Program on Equity and Inclusion in Healthcare, Michelle Van Ryn writes, unconscious bias, also called implicit bias, affects healthcare providers every day, especially when they are stressed or tired. Swift and automatic, it can reduce quality of care and even lead to medical errors. If we are not aware of it and taking measures to counter it, it affects quality of care. Well, I've been in treatment environments, and they tend to always be stressful environments with tired people. Not always, but that wouldn't be a surprise to anybody. Dr. Sue's 5 practices regarding microaggressions are: 1. Learn from constant vigilance about your own biases and fears. 2. Experiential reality is important in interacting with people who differ from you in terms of race, cultural, or ethnicity. 3. Don't be defensive. 4. Be open to discussing your own attitudes and biases and how they might have hurt others or related biases on your part. And 5. Be an ally. Stand personally against all forms of biases and discrimination. Because we're all slaves to our biases and prejudices, NAADAC has a code of ethics, most recently updated in 2016. Its aim is to help prevent problems like that one in California or the one going on in Ohio. This code could definitely have helped prevent what's going on in Vancouver or what happened in Toronto also. It's a duty for caregivers to become more knowledgeable. Services that demonstrate appropriate respect for the fundamental rights of people are the standard. Professionals shall demonstrate cultural humility. Providers maintain an interpersonal stance that is other-oriented and accepting of the cultural identities of the other person, be it clients, colleagues, peers, employees, volunteers, supervisors, subordinates, etc. Let's look at some of the demographics. Here's the results of a few polls. There's a Gallup poll that has been going on since 1948. We'll compare the environment in which AA was started, the origins of the 12-step program, compared to the most recent poll. YouGov poll is from the United Kingdom, and they compared belief in God in the UK with other jurisdictions, the USA, France, Germany, Spain, and Italy. And Pew Research, a 2015 study looking at beliefs in the different generations. So let's look up here. The 1940s, around the time the Big Book was written. 95% of Middle America was, if they didn't believe in Judeo-Christian values, they were raised in Judeo-Christian values. The statistics at the time show other religions as 0%. Now, statistically, that means less than 1/2% of all other religions were Buddhist, Taoist, Hindu, Sikh, Muslim. I'm forgetting so many that would have existed in the United States at the time, but in such a small quantity that they were not in the consciousness of the people who wrote the Big Book. Nuns were 5%. So if AA started out with 100 people, 95 of them had no problem with the God thing. So let's compare that to now. Now, belief in God hasn't gone away, but only 3 out of 4 people identify as Judeo-Christian. 6% are from other religions now. And nuns are over 20%. So the makeup of an AA room and the way the big book would be written today, if it hadn't already been written in 1939, would have been informed by a very different makeup of the people they aim to serve. And of course, it was written in the U.S. This UK study asked, do you believe in God or a higher power? And the U.S. is the only sort of developed country that has over 50% of its people, Italy as well, believing in some sort of god or gods. In the UK, it's 34%, 27% in France. Italy, 62%, but the U.S. by far is the most religious jurisdiction in the Western world. When you look at people coming into treatment, 11% of the silent generation are atheists, agnostics, or no religious affiliation. That's up from the last time the Pew did a study in 2007. 17% of baby boomers are nuns. That's up 3%. Everything's up from 2007. Generation X, people born after 1965, before 1980, 23%. That's up 4%. And millennials, 1 in 3, 35%, up 10% from 2007. So that's how things are trending. Meet Will Gervais, no relation that I'm aware of to Ricky Gervais. He did a test to find out how many closet atheists there are in the United States. By his estimates, he believes that 26% of Americans don't believe in God or gods. This was pretty cool. He had a baseline where he asked a group of people 9 questions. And, they're innocuous questions. I own a dog, yes or no. I'm a vegetarian, yes or no. And what people wrote down is they didn't check off the yeses to each question. The only thing they had to answer was the number of yeses to the questionnaire. So if there's 9 questions and they answered 5 yes, they would write down the number 5. And then in another set of questions, there were 10 questions, and one included, I do not believe in God. So again, there's 10 questions, and people answer the number of questions they answered yes to. So I do not believe in God. If that's a yes, that would increase the number they put. The base group was 9. This had 10. So you compare one set of tests to the other. Nobody's revealing whether they believe in God or not. They're just revealing the number of yeses they said to the test. And in this sampling he did at the University of Kentucky in 2017, his estimate is 26%, higher than what happens when people are asked directly by Pew or Gallup or anybody else. Here's the results of an Ipsos poll. We could spend a whole day on that. Let's just look at people being asked the question, I lose respect for people when I find out they are not religious. Now, 60% of people strongly disagree with that. I lose respect for people when I find out they're religious. No, I don't. 60%, that's great. But why isn't it 100%? Who are these 4% that strongly agree that they lose respect for people if they find they're not religious, or 11% that somewhat agree with that? Who knows Phil Zuckerman? He's written for the Washington Post, for Psychology Today, about secular phobia, defined as the irrational dislike, distrust, fear, or hatred of non-religious people. Here's what he found. While about 10% of Americans said they'd be unhappy if a family member married someone of a different political persuasion, 30% of Americans said they'd be unhappy if a family member married a gun owner, and nearly 50% of Americans say they'd be unhappy if a family member married an atheist. Secular phobia is alive and well in AA. Yep. We have homophobia, we have Islamophobia, and in American life there is secular phobia. We talked about microaggressions. Here are some of the common intended or unintended microaggressions that are going to happen in an AA meeting. A non-believer may hear, "Keep an open mind. Keep coming back. You'll get it. God could and would if he were sought." Well intended to be compassionate. When coming from a believer to a non-believer, from the majority to the minority, this is and may be perceived as a hostile act, because it never suggests the possibility that recovery can be just as stable, just as enjoyable without a supernatural higher power. AA rituals such as prayer, the theistic bias of the literature, these create or perpetuate disadvantage for AAs that are part of the underrepresented non-theistic minority. This atmosphere is referred to in human rights law and language as systemic discrimination. Despite this in AA, or maybe because of it, one of the largest growing populations in AA is groups for agnostics and atheists. There was under 50 of them before the turn of the century. There's now over 500 groups without a prayer. If you don't subscribe to a world with a prayer-answering, sobriety-granting higher power, agnostic atheist AA meetings might be for you. And this is part of why Joe Nowinski has updated the 12-step Facilitation Handbook. Diversity and democracy. Anyone wishing to implement TSF should be aware of the great diversity that exists within 12-step culture. Especially in urban centers, you can find groups specifically for women, men, young people, LGBTQ, for clergy, for atheists and agnostics, nurses or doctors, and so on. If you're unfamiliar with atheist and agnostic AA meetings, visit secularaa.org for a list of worldwide meetings. For more information, I just happen to hold the position of outreach chair for Secular AA, and at the end of this slideshow there will be an email address where you can get more information from me, or when I rotate out the next outreach chair. This is a map we showed the NAADAC attendees in Houston, Texas last year. There's probably more of them now, but it shows agnostic atheist meetings in continental USA. So depending where you live, there might be a meeting you can go to. Open meetings, anyone from the recovery community, from treatment, a caregiver, someone with an alcoholic in your life, anyone can go to an atheist agnostic meeting. It's an AA meeting like any other. Since 2014, there's been a biennial international conference, now called ICSA, International Conference of Secular AA. The first one was held in Santa Monica in 2014. About 300 people were in attendance. Not all atheists and agnostics. Some members of the general AA population came to see history in the making. It was the first of its kind. Austin hosted, and Toronto held the third biennial International Conference of Secular AA in 2018. Depending when you're listening to this, 2020 will be in Washington, D.C. in the fall. SecularAA.org for more information. Not all of AA is hostile towards agnostics and atheists, of course. 20 years into Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson wrote, "This was the great contribution of our atheists and agnostics. They had widened our gateway so that all who suffer might pass through, regardless of their belief or lack of belief." And AA members and other 12-step community members have taken things into their own hands in terms of providing secular literature. In 1990, there were two great books offered. Philip Z., atheist therapist, OA members, wrote A Skeptic's Guide to the 12 Steps. Martha Cleveland and Arliss G. wrote The Alternative 12 Steps, A Secular Guide to Recovery. Women written, different experience, different narrative. Forget the steps completely if you like. There's John Lauritsen's a freethinker in Alcoholics Anonymous. He's been sober since Bill Wilson was still alive, got sober in New York, lives in Boston now, and he makes a great argument for a perfectly satisfying AA life without paying any attention to the steps at all. Award-winning author Maria Hornbacher turned her writing talents to recovery with Waiting, a non-believer's higher power. A great read. I had the privilege of interviewing her for thefix.com about this book when I was still months away from finishing Beyond Belief, which is the first secular daily reflection book for people in recovery. I'm happy to say it wasn't the last. Others have followed. Roger C. and AA Agnostica have published many great books. The first was The Little Book, a collection of alternative 12 steps. There's 20 different variations of the 12 steps to open one's imagination. Adam N's Common Sense Recovery has a foreword by Reverend Ward Ewing, Class A trustee of Alcoholics Anonymous Emeritus, reminding us that recovery isn't the supernatural versus the natural worldview. Vince Hawkins is a pen name for an expat British journalist living in Spain. And he's got a bunch of books, and they read in the way it's like sitting down after the meeting with a non-believer and saying, "So, how do you do AA?" Dale K. Call him an atheist mucker. He rewrote the big book. Someone had to, so he's written the first 164 pages in a secular language. Why not? You don't need anybody's permission. Punk rocker John Grisham offers a biographical look at questioning authority and doing AA in a Sid Vicious cover of Frank Sinatra Doing It My Way approach. 25 years sober, outwardly agnostic. If you look back in Rebellion Dogs Radio, you'll find an interview with him. Other biographies worth mentioning. Jovita Bydlowska, Drunk Mum, a Memoir. Brilliant book. Thomas B's memoir, Each Breath a Gift, just came out in 2017, sharing 45 years of sobriety. Party Girl by Anna David, Nikki Sixx's Heroin Diaries. Gen Xers aren't overtly religious, and either are their writings. Read these memoirs, they're great. About Being Here, A Journey of Drinking and Sobriety and Thoughts About AA and Secular Recovery by Life J. Just came out. Wasn't even available when I was in Houston. And the hits keep coming. My home AA group, Beyond Belief Agnostics and Free Thinkers groups, meets 3 times a week. One day of the week, Mondays, we talk about the steps for those who want a secular step meeting. And we're never trapped into the same old reading because a new book is published every 12 weeks, it seems. Steve K. is another fellow The Fix writer, and he has his own blog. I'll read anything he writes. Jeffrey Munn is a Southern California therapist, and he has a no spiritual woo-woo practical 12 steps. He's repackaged this book. This is how it looked when I was presenting in Houston last year, but it's now called Sober Without God, and it's making quite a buzz. It's a great book. Our group enjoyed it. And there's more than one Bill W., and one of them has written The 12 Secular Steps. If you can't write all that down right now, don't worry about it. Visit rebelliondogspublishing.com, click on Reading Room, and these books and plenty more recommendations can be found there. Rebellion Dogs Radio also, as I mentioned, has interviews with some of these writers. So there's no excuses for resources. Now, with 12-step programs, the newer the fellowship, the newer the literature, the more contemporary the language. Hence, modern books aren't heteronormative, they aren't patriarchal, and they don't treat atheists and agnostics as second-class citizens. Here's a fellowship with a book written in 1986 that talks in a 1986 kind of way about higher powers and such things, and how it describes the group or those who've come before us as your higher power. As we realize how helpful this network of support was, we sensed that a belief in any specific God or divinity was unnecessary. A higher power can be as secular as hope, guidance, or SLAA members who have preceded us. Move up one more decade, Marijuana Anonymous, Life with Hope. To some of us, it's a god of an organized religion. To others, it's a state of being, commonly called spirituality. Some of us believe in no deity. A higher power may be the strength gained from being a part of and caring for a community of others. There's room in Marijuana Anonymous for all beliefs. We don't proselytize any particular view or religion. And if that's all too last century for you, let's look at 21st century problems and 21st century programs. Online Gamers Anonymous, 12 Principles for Atheists and Agnostics. Look at number 2. Step 2, dare to believe that there lies within us the power to restore balance to our lives. Isn't that brilliant? 11, find and study something we find amazing. Realize that there are ways of living that can bring us a deeper degree of personal fulfillment. Teen Addictions Anonymous, founded in 2007. These meetings happen in schools. Separation of church and state. You can't use the word God, but you can still use the principles. They use the universal higher power. They also take the morality of religion out. Step 4, I'll make a fearless and honest review of my life, my values, and my goals. No problem, easily translated. This was a ball. I introduced this book. Some of them had seen it at NAADAC. Most of them hadn't. Came out in October 2017, Russell Brand's Recovery. Steps 1, 2, 3. Are you a bit fucked? 2. Could you be not fucked? 3. Are you on your own going to unfuck yourself? 4. Made a list of the people you fucked, so on and so forth. You know, it's not meant to be blasphemous. It's meant to be easygoing. We are not a glum lot, right? Rule 62, let's not take ourselves too damn seriously. Maybe what you dislike about the steps is the idea of powerlessness. Maybe you think that for recovery, this ego deflation at depth isn't the right approach. Maybe empowerment is a better approach. You would like the proactive 12 steps, available online ever since 2010. Check it out. Erica Spiegelman has a great book. There can be no permanent recovery without an awareness of oneself as unique in all the world. The authentic voice will always be more accurate, more informed to your situation than any cookie-cutter recovery program. In this way, you can begin to think of recovery as an adventure in deep self-exploration. That is Rewired by Erica Spiegelman. Meta Johnson had a lot to do with the updated Code of Ethics. She is, I think she's the current president at NAADAC. She was a guest of ours on Rebellion Dogs Radio. She says, cultural humility is other-oriented. Cultural humility is to maintain a willingness to suspend what you know or what you think you know based on generalizations about the client's culture. Power imbalances between counselor and client have no place in cultural humility. There's an expectation that you understand the population you're serving and that you take the time to understand them better. You don't have to be a treatment professional for this to make sense if you work with newcomers to sobriety and recovery. Again, the updated 12-step facilitation. Others will identify as agnostic or atheist. Such beliefs do not preclude embracing the values found in 12-step culture, honesty, altruism, humility, and so on. Individualized treatment plans. No cookie-cutter stuff. Sometimes language is a problem. AA's book Living Sober, the French version, is called Vivre sans alcool. The meaning, of course, is life without alcohol. Is there no word for sobriety, living sober, in French? It's interesting. And to this point, not everything in sort of a theistic worldview has a word for a secular approach to things. And I don't think AAs have to continue to speak in GOD acronyms. Good orderly direction, gift of desperation. AA is big enough for everyone to share in their own native tongue. We've often looked at worldview in a linear way. Either you have a supernatural worldview and believe in a prayer answering, sobriety granting higher power, or you have a natural worldview. You don't believe there's anything up there. If you're an agnostic, you're in the middle. This tends to make the agnostic position look weak, unexamined, instead of a mature and rationalized conclusion about the evidence. More recently, at least someone's looked at this sort of linear approach as more of a continuum. A study looked at worldview as either you're religious or you're spiritual or agnostic, you're unsure or you're atheist. In 2007, a peer-reviewed journal said atheists are less likely to attend AA. However, an atheist, once involved, are at no apparent disadvantage in deriving AA-related benefits. In spite of much discussion to the contrary, there is little evidence that spirituality directly accounts for later abstinence. So, here's the problem with the linear approach, and I'm going to talk about what I talked about in Texas, a two-dimensional way of looking at it instead of linear. Because if you're a believer, you can have a strong or a weak position. If you're a non-believer, a strong or weak position. But the agnostic in the middle, it's always a weak position. We know what the belligerent believer is like. God could and would if he were sought. We know what the belligerent non-believer is like. God could and would if he existed. Ha! So what is the belligerent agnostic's position? Simply put, I don't know, and either do you. A conclusion on a God or no God is a fool's errand. A worldview is an intuition. Holding a natural worldview is a core belief. Holding a supernatural worldview also a core belief. When my car starts skidding, I don't pray, I countersteer. In times of crisis, if I had a supernatural worldview, I'd connect to some supernatural construct of reality. But if I hold a natural worldview, all that is known and all that is unknown still has a natural explanation. I respond to emergencies from a natural construct of reality. But how we intuitively feel about something is one thing, but then how do we reason that belief to ourselves or to others? Let's look at the intuition. On the North Pole, there's a natural worldview. On the South Pole, a supernatural worldview. Again, I argue that we're compelled to feel one way or another. You don't come to believe anything, or you rarely do. These things are like being left-handed or right-handed. One just seems more natural to you. But then there's our reasoning style, or our personality, our reasoning personality. Adding west and east to the north and south, you could call it a concrete reasoning style versus abstract, or binary versus complex, Gnostic versus agnostic or agnostic. Call it reductionist versus holistic, or I don't care what language you use, absolutist versus relativist. Concrete versus abstract thinkers. Who do you relate to? Let's use 2 examples. Penn Jillette is a binary thinker. Either God is or he isn't. But he says that he really relates to the hardcore fundamentalists that he debates against. At a very deep level, he respects them. I share a part of their heart. I think in a certain sense, I'm a preacher. He finds agnostics to be insufferable pains in the butt. But let's have that side of the street represented. This is Sang San, 3rd patriarch to the Dhyana sect. The perfect way is only difficult for those who pick and choose. Do not like, do not dislike. All will then be clear. Make a hairbreadth difference, and heaven and earth are set apart. If you want the truth to stand clearly before you, never be for or against. The struggle between for and against is the mind's worst disease. Take that, Penn Jillette. Now let's look at a supernatural versus a natural worldview. In this supernatural ring, on this side of the ring, we got Bill Wilson. And over here, if you don't know this guy, he's the editor for Skeptic Magazine, and his name is Michael Shermer. We all know We Agnostics, where Bill Wilson makes the claim that deep down in every man, woman, and child there's a fundamental idea of God. When we draw near to him, he discloses himself to us. That's an opinion, Bill. And Michael Shermer has an opinion or a view as well. And here's how he put it in 2017. The belief that the world is governed by natural laws and forces that can be understood, and that all phenomena are part of nature and can be explained by natural causes, including human cognitive, moral, and social phenomena. The application of scientific naturalism in the human realm, led by the widespread adoption of Enlightenment humanism, a cosmopolitan worldview that places supreme value on science and reason, eschews the supernatural entirely and relies exclusively on nature and nature's laws, including human nature. So in a quadrilateral look at things, you've got the concrete versus the abstract, the natural worldview versus the supernatural worldview. Addiction and recovery can be explained in any of these quadrants. If you're dealing with someone new to recovery, this will help you meet them where they're at. I spend a whole weekend going through a seminar just like this, but in the case of NAADAC, we only had an hour and a half. So here's the Coles Notes version. Let's say someone is a concrete reasoner and intuitively they're supernatural. So they believe in some sort of higher power. Well, luckily for them, they've hit the jackpot. You're dealing with someone who needs no interpretation, because most of the 12-step recovery literature is written in their language. If you're an abstract supernaturalist, we might call you a somethingist. You believe in something. You're just not relating to any of the religious interpretations of that. How can a power greater than you be something you can understand? And certainly the AA claims that you can command this power, God could and would if he were sought, is something you're a little uncomfortable with. There must be something. If there's a material world It's not unreasonable to think there is a supernatural equivalent, just like there is dark matter and matter in the universe. So, to an abstract supernaturalist, it doesn't have to be defined in binary terms. And, they'll talk about collective conscious or what have you. If you hold a natural worldview and you're abstract, you might be what we call an apatheist. Don't know, don't care. Can we move on? You wouldn't give it any more thought than you would about, Hollywood relationships or fashion, if those things don't particularly interest you. You hold the position that it's unknown and unknowable. Why should you spend any time with it? Why are people watching YouTube debates with the new atheists debating theological scholars? It's just irritating and a waste of time. If you're a concrete naturalist, binary, it's either a yes or a no. Well, forget about this sort of trying to find God, because there isn't one. If you attended a secular AA meeting, you would find that if they use higher power language at all, they're talking about secular powers, power of example, a higher purpose, putting your faith in the process, or those that have come before you. But if I've made it sound like there's really only sort of 4 positions, and so there's 4 voices out there, and it's just that simple, that's not what I mean at all. Because within each of these, we have personalities and principles. Look at the big 5 personality traits, and you can see why each of these quadrants have a variety of different voices. Within each one, some people are more open to new experience than others. Liberals tend to be more open to new experience than conservatives. On the other hand, conservatives seem to be more conscientious than liberals. Extroverts versus introverts. If you're not like a true believer in the 12-step recovery program and you're an introvert, you're not going to demand that your view is heard. You're going to keep your peace. If you're an extrovert, on the other hand, you're going to be in their face about it. Agreeableness is something else, too. How lenient or good-natured are you? Or how critical or suspicious are you? I recently spoke for someone who I've known in recovery for 30 years. We've been to meetings together. I've listened to this person's step 5. We've talked about recovery. He introduced me. I gave my talk. He had no idea I was a member of an agnostic atheist group. It never came up. In 30 years, we talked about, his step 3, his step 4, his step 5. I don't mind him talking about his connection to God or his lack of connection to God. I don't have to step in and say, but God doesn't exist. It's his salvation I care about, not mine. So I guess I'm agreeable in the extreme. And then neuroticism comes into play. How touchy or emotional are you versus how calm or even tempered are you? That's going to make a difference in terms of how you express yourself and in terms of how someone else would best meet you where you're at. So I was afraid that all of this stuff would be overwhelming to people who are just trying to help with addiction. And this slide got quite a few laughs. I didn't want to differentiate between the baby boomers and the millennials, so I used both Dr. McCoy's. Damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a guru. Sorry, Gen X, but Picard and the next generation, they didn't have a Dr. McCoy, so not included, nothing personal. But it's not so important to understand all of these different ways of expressing themselves. The important thing, something therapists know well, motivational interviewing, open-ended questions, just get people talking about their own experience, and it'll be really easy to understand where they're coming from. And NAADAC isn't frozen in time. They're adapting to a new reality too, and their code of conduct speaks to that. Professionals have to demonstrate cultural humility. Providers have to maintain an interpersonal stance that is other-oriented and accepting of the cultural identities of the other person. Addiction professionals have to recognize and be sensitive to the diverse cultural meanings. Words like atheist and agnostic, it doesn't matter what the therapist, how the therapist defines those words. How does the person suffering from substance use disorder define those words? They don't have to fit into our definitions. And as a matter of fact, 20 years into AA, Bill Wilson was trying to mitigate problems with Buddhists. Some of the traditional AAs were offended that they were taking the word God out of AA because they don't believe in God. They used the word good. And as far as he was concerned, a belief in the steps as they stand is not at all a requirement for membership among us. And 30 years into sobriety, Bill Wilson said, the full individual liberty to practice any creed or principle or therapy, whatever, should be a first consideration for all of us. Let's not pressure anyone with our individual or even our collective views. Instead, let's accord each other the respect and love that is due every human being. So before the word other-oriented care even existed, it was an ethos as far as the founders were concerned. Back to the code of conduct. We have to understand our own personal, professional, and cultural values and beliefs, and don't let them get in the way. Because we feel strongly about something is no reason to discriminate against someone else, not where other-oriented care is concerned. So it's just a matter of considering diversity and other people's values and interaction styles and their cultural expectations. If a word stands between you and the sobriety-granting potential within the 12 steps, change the word. The word won't mind. But won't AA get mad? Well, in 1953, they were discussing just this thing at the General Service Conference, and Bill Wilson was talking about a number of groups in a number of places. Some of them had a 7-step program, some of them had a 6-step program, some of them changed this or changed that. And what he said was, we have a tradition that guarantees the right of any group to vary all of them if they want to. Let's remember, we're talking about suggested steps and traditions. Do you think we should tell those people you can't belong to AA unless you print those steps the way we have them? No, they're just going through the old pioneering process that we had to go through ourselves. Professionals have to respect the roles of other family members and other support workers too. They all come with their own values and beliefs. And it's not just doing no harm. Addiction professionals have to advocate for the needs of a diverse population. Don't just stand there, do something. And AA hasn't been on the sidelines either. In 2018, the AA Grapevine put out a booklet of stories that have been in the Grapevine over the years. It's called One Big Tent, Atheist and Agnostic AA Members Share Experience, Strength, and Hope. It was, when they announced this book, it was they had the most pre-order sales of this book of any Grapevine book, because they've done for young people, for the LGBTQ population, for African Americans. Every underrepresented population has their own booklet. And this one, there was definitely a demand for it. And the General Service Conference in Canada and U.S., they adopted a pamphlet that the British General Service Conference wrote called The God Word, Agnostics and Atheists in AA. Not everyone's going to love them. Not every atheist in AA likes these books or pamphlets. but they're arrows in the quiver. Conventional counseling styles may not meet the needs of all clients. Providers shall seek supervision, education, consultation, and be attentive to the individuals and their specific culturally driven needs. This is a bibliography. I'm going through it fast, but you can check some of the sources I used. If you're a nerd like me, it'll be lots of fun. If you're not familiar with this framework, just listen in meetings. Go to a meeting and try to see if you can figure out who's in what quadrant, just based on the way they talk about their recovery. And again, people need to feel heard. They don't need to be told. So it's just a matter of listening. And any of these are defendable positions, and they're workable positions. Just I have to know where I am, and it'll make sense to me that these other people are speaking another language, even though they're talking about the same recovery process. Like I said, for about 3 or 4 years, I've been threatening to finish a book I started about all this sort of stuff, and maybe I'll do that. Who knows? But anyway, you want more information? You want to call bullshit? I am all ears. You can reach me at news@rebelliondogspublishing.com, outreach chair at seculara.net, or we're there because you're there, social media, Twitter and Facebook. Thanks for taking time to be a part of Rebellion Dogs Radio. We like to go out with a song. This is a new artist called Today. The song is called Ride, just came out in July. This is someone I just learned about recently through my radio show. From the mean streets of Toronto's East End. He came from low-income housing, alcoholism, and music seemed to be his only escape. He did cover things at first on Instagram and had some viral success, and this is his latest single. It's called Ride. Hope you like it. See you online. This is Today. A link to his website music will be at rebelliondogspublishing.com.